Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for APEX's third annual Women's Collective Summit. It's my honor today to have our first panel of Asian American and Pacific Islander firsts, and it's such a privilege for me to be able to moderate this panel today to really discuss some of the joys and challenges that these women have had in breaking barriers in elected office. So first, let's do some introductions. We have Board Trustee Manufo Liaiga-Anoa'i from who is the Vice President and Trustee of Jefferson Elementary School District Governing Board. She's a proud San Franciscan native and first-generation Samoan American. And she also was recently reelected this past November to serve her third term on the Jefferson Elementary School District in Daly City. And she also serves on several other commissions at the city and county level. For the past 10 years, she's also been a commissioner to the San Mateo County and past vice president on the Commission of Status Women. And her leadership has been recognized and celebrated as Woman of the Year in the California Assembly, in the City and County of San Francisco by Mayors Willie Brown and Ed Lee, and San Mateo County Board of Supervisors, and nationally through the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Our next panelist is Representative Nguyen, Massachusetts House of Representatives, 18th Essex District. She is a first-generation Vietnamese American immigrant and was the first person in her family to graduate from college and law school. She was first elected into office in November of 2015 and is the first Vietnamese American woman in elected office in the Commonwealth, the first Vietnamese American elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives, the first Asian American on the board of directors of the Massachusetts Caucus of Women Legislators, and the first Asian American woman to serve as vice chair of a committee. Please go. Houstonian and is a third-generation Chinese American. She's the first Asian American elected to the Houston City Council and the first Asian American woman elected to the Texas House of Representatives. Her history-making election occurred on December 4th in 1993 when she captured 60% of the votes in a runoff for the district seat and served 3 terms. In 2002, she made history again by beating a 22-year incumbent and became vice chair of 2 House committees. And she has served 2 terms in the Texas House. So please welcome Chair Wong. Last panelist is Commissioner Mai Song from Macomb County Board of Commissioners. She is a wonderful addition to this panel, considering that she was elected in 2020 and as a Macomb County Commissioner in District 2. And she's of Hmong descent and was born in a refugee camp in Thailand in 1984, and her family moved to Ohio in 1987. So please welcome our wonderful panelists and give them a round of applause. So let's start getting this conversation started. What motivated you to run for office and why this specific office? So I will start with Representative Nguyen.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. It's so inspiring to see Asian American women really doing and great things and rocking it throughout the country. And so really such a pleasure to be here to join you on this conversation. For me, I think it started with my work as a legal services attorney prior to getting elected. I worked in one of the biggest legal services organizations helping victims of domestic violence, survivors of domestic sexual assault, as well as seniors, veterans, people with disabilities, and low-wage workers, including mostly new immigrants coming to the United States or the Commonwealth. And in doing that work, not only did I represent them in the courtroom, but I also worked on policy and saw how much policy can have real-life impact on people. And also, I saw how a good legislator can make such a great difference. And so I started looking into my own legislator and realized that this is someone who has been in office for 8 years and had not passed any bill as a far-right Tea Party Republican. He really was against all the policies that I was pushing for, including paid family medical leave or Fight for 15, trying to increase minimum wage here in Massachusetts. And seeing just how he was not responsive to me reaching out to him for 2 years, trying to even get a conversation, I realized how important it is to have someone who is willing to listen to the people, because you can't fully serve the people without understanding their needs, their issues, and what they're looking for. And so I felt as though I had no choice but to run for office when, and I think this is the straw that broke the camel's back, when he proposed legislation that would allow police officers to stop anyone who looks illegal. And as a person of color, as a woman of color, I realized just how ludicrous that is to have someone in office who wants to legalize racial profiling. And that was why I decided to run for office, to fully represent the people and to make sure that we are working towards a more inclusive and welcoming community for all.
I'm sorry. The question is now being directed to Commissioner Song.
Well, thank you for having me here as well. It's an honor to be a part of this panel as a woman. Why I decided to run for office, I've lived in Warren, Michigan for over 18 years. I moved here right after high school to attend the College for Creative Studies, and I've lived here ever since. Now I have a small business, and too often there are people in a position of power at the table making decisions for a whole community, and I didn't see anyone that looked like me. And I wanted my children to look up at our leaders and see someone that looked like them. And so that was my driving factor as to why I decided to run for office.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And what about you, Chair Wong?
Hello to everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I think I'm the grandmother of all of you, but I started to run not because I chose to, but because a group of us, a group of Asian Americans, were gathered together to find people to run for the Houston City Council. And it just so happened that the fellow that we chose, who was an attorney, and we already had him all set up. We found him a consultant. We got his hair cut. We got his wonderful picture made. And then when the position that he wanted to run for, another Asian American woman decided to run. And when she put her name on the ballot, then he decided he did not want to run. That happened 2 times. So the second time that it happened, we also had another young man who we thought would run, but his company would not give him a leave of absence. So he decided not to run. So we were stuck with no one to run, and the group was determined to have someone to run. And it just so happened that the person who was in the district in which I lived was termed out. He could not run again. And so they said, well, why don't you run, Martha? So I says, okay. So that's how it happened. It was by default. But I'm glad that I did it. And it was a very successful campaign, a very difficult campaign. But we can persist and we can win.
Thank you so much for sharing, and we're so glad that you were able to, be there for that opportunity. And then Trustee Manufo.
Good morning, and talofa from the San Francisco Bay Area. My name is Manufou, Liaiga-Anoa'i, and I'm deeply honored and humbled to join such an impressive and esteemed panel this morning. But I'm even more moved to see that my Congresswoman, Honorable Aumua Amata Coleman Radawagan from the territory of American Samoa, was able to offer opening remarks. She is actually someone that I aspire to be, and I will say someone that I've embraced her leadership, and is one of the reasons why I sit and pursue the seat that I sit in now. All of the comments that came before resonate with me. I also ran by default. I was tapped, but I am a mother of 6, and my youngest is special needs, and her needs were not met. And the person that occupied the seat that I ran for, he and I had a discussion 2 weeks before his unfortunate and untimely passing. That's how the seat became vacant. I was tapped to pursue the seat. I was nervous to take on the challenge, not seeing anyone that looks like me at the table. And that's why I appreciate this discussion this morning. I recognize that we are representing voices from our Asian American Pacific Islander communities, but I recognize representation and how our Pacific Islander community is many times over not at the table, and decisions are made for us not reflective of our needs or our voices. So again, I'm honored to join this group this morning and this important conversation.
Thank you so much, Trustee. I'm going to have a follow-up question for you. So what advice do you have for Pacific Islander women, Asian American women who want to run for office? Being in a position that you are in and being one of those first, how do you, what kind of advice would you give to them?
Thank you for the question. I appreciate that we recognize we're all first, but I think I can speak for us all that our mission is to ensure that there are second and third and many more behind us. I will say that tokenism has served me well because a lot of times I had to fit in a box and it allowed me an opportunity. So why I share that is don't let it scare you away. You may feel compromised that it's against your values, but the reality is we don't set the rules. And when we see an opportunity, we've got to take it. We're challenged to be women of color, specifically women of the AAPI community, and recently, thank you, President Biden, AANHPI community. And for me, my advice would be do your research, do your homework for the seat that you hope to occupy, because the reality is that you're going to have an even harder challenge to be heard. So you need to be smarter. You need to be strategic. You need to know the community that you serve. And you also need to look to your left and right and see who your allies are. And the reality, a lot of reasons why people of color, period, don't run for office is the financial part. We can't even afford to apply to run. So my hope and my challenge is that we do a better job in how we support candidates of color, and today more specifically AANHPI candidates, how they can run. The financial piece is overwhelming and daunting. So I ask that you reach out to partners to help you support your dream. But more importantly, go to the meetings, be present. Don't just jump in the race and run for office. Do your part. Represent your community. If you're fortunate to get the seat that you choose to run for, allow it to facilitate your leadership and represent the communities that you hope to serve.
Thank you so much. And thank you also for pointing out that sometimes that there's a financial challenge for our community in running for office. And in fact, today we actually have a section as a part of the Women's Collective Summit on how to run for office when you're not rich. So I think this is hopefully a timely discussion for those of us who are interested in learning more about that and supporting those who don't have the financial capacity. So let me also build off of that particular question in the sense of what how would you get AAPI women to feel more confident? I think we've had multiple examples of people asking AAPI women to run for office 3 to 7 times, sometimes even more. And so I think our confidence level might be a little bit lower than it should be, even though we are fully capable of being elected leaders. So I put that question to Commissioner Xiong. What would you tell AAPI women in terms of confidence? How do you increase that confidence to be able to run for office?
Thank you for that question. I think there's one word, and it's that you are enough, that you are good enough, and that you can have a seat at the table. And that, AAPIs, we are resilient and we've overcome so many obstacles that running for office is just another one of those obstacles that we can always achieve. And I think it's financially supporting women as they run for office and really putting into the mindset of our community, and that when you're donating to a candidate, that you're investing in their values and that they will give back tenfold. And so I think in our community, we're not used to donating to candidates. And I really, myself, ran into that issue, is that trying to get people to understand that you're investing in them and that it is very valuable.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Chair Wong, you have been in public service for decades now, which is a testament to your longevity in this work. What was it like for you as a woman back in the 90s, having to put yourself forward in a position that most people probably did not see a lot of women in that type of leadership, as well as an Asian American woman? Can you please share that experience with us?
Yes, well, one of the things that happened to me was that there were not a lot of visible Asian Americans in the city of Houston, even though there was a nice population of about 200,000. So I was invited to be a part of what we call Leadership Houston, and I was in the third class of Leadership Houston. And in that class, we learned about the city and things like that. But once I got into that organization, people began to understand that the Asian American community needed to be involved in all aspects. And so I was invited to be a part of many other organizations. But what I say to people who want to run is your family has to agree that that's important for you to do. And my first $30,000 when I met a consultant to enter into the race, and it was September when I decided to run for city council. And one young man who had already started in January had all of the finances of the people who give the regular givers to the Houston City Council. He had all of that money tied up. And my consultant told me she wouldn't even take me because I was entering the race so late that I had to raise $30,000 before she would even consider representing me and helping me. So, of course, I went to my family and I told them my mother and father gave me $5,000. My sister gave me $5,000. My other sister gave me $5,000. And I still had control of 3 checking accounts of my children, who 2 were out of college. 1 was in college. And I called them and told them, I'm taking $5,000 out of your checking account to run for office. So that's how I got my first $30,000. And so your family has to be supportive. But I say to those who want to run, what you need to do is to establish yourself in the community. As the commissioner said, you need to start with your local PTA or your school. Become active in your school. Be known in your community. Be a part of your homeowners association. Take an office in all of those organizations where people don't want to do anything, but volunteer to do that. And I always say volunteer to be the president and volunteer to be the treasurer. Those are the 2 most important positions. So join every local organization that you can. Do it well. And once you do it well, what happens is you establish a reputation. And that reputation is what is going to help you to move up the ladder into other positions. And you will find that as you serve on different boards in your local community, that's you are establishing your base. So once you establish your base, which is your PTA or your parent teachers organization, your homeowners association, your Y association, whatever organization you join, that's your base. And you develop good relationships with everyone on that board, because those are the people that will support you. And you're going to be surprised that they will give you money because they trust you because of the experiences that you've had with them. And so that's how you're going to slowly build your base. And you're going to meet some pretty important people in some of those organizations who can introduce you to other people who can give you money. And that's going to be how you're going to start raising your money. The amazing thing is I had a friend, a cousin, who actually was the successful attorney who was going to run, and he introduced me to other attorneys who had PACs. Their law firms had PACs. And because of his introductions, then those PACs decided to support me. But it took that introduction of my cousin to his friends who were attorneys who headed the PACs of those local big law firms. So use your relationships. I always say it's about relationships. Learn to develop them, learn to keep them active, and learn to use them. And also help those people who help you, because that is going to pay off in the long term. When my cousin introduced me to those PACs, I'll tell you, I was also able to get him to be on the executive committee of the Greater Houston Partnership, which is our big business group. I was also able to get him to serve on our Metropolitan Transit Authority. So when you have someone who is supporting you, make sure that you give back to them and give them an opportunity to also serve the community. That's very important. The position that you're in, you have an opportunity to get other people, other Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, to become a part of serving, maybe not in an elected office, but in positions where they can be of influence. And during my first term as Houston City Council, the mayor always would turn to me after I started letting him know that I wanted Asian Americans on every board that the city of Houston had. He would turn to me and say, Martha, do you have a nominee? And so he began to get the idea. So we probably placed 30 people on 30 different boards across the city of Houston. So that's how you spread your position, and you help other Asian Americans to become familiar with other organizations, and they can start building their networks. So it's helping each other.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Chair Wong. And I do want to let people know that during today's sessions, we will have a session on how to tap into your network. So thank you so much for reminding people that it's such a essential part of working on a campaign and being a candidate. Speaking of which, I would like to ask Representative Nguyen, what skills or experiences proved to be most important to you when you were campaigning?
Thank you for the question. I think that advocacy is an important skill to have. As I mentioned, when I was working in legal services, not only did I represent people, but I also advocated for bills. And that proved to be helpful now in advocating for when you're running for office. You're advocating for yourself. You're trying to also advocate for the policies that you're pushing forward and trying to convince people that you are the best person to represent their interests. And in thinking through what was most helpful in convincing people to be supportive, it's so important to think about how to speak from the heart and how to be your authentic self. The reality of it, because there's so few Asian Americans and even fewer Asian American women, there's really no playbook that's out there for us, right? So you kind of have to invent the playbook as you go. And you basically have to go through and see what fits you. Because most of what's out there, even when you're talking to consultants who are used to representing candidates who may not look like you, may not have the same background, some of the tactics don't work. And so it's really a trial and error, and you have to really just try to put yourself out there and be willing to change, because, my elevator pitch when I first started was very different from what, at the end of the campaign a year later, or my strategy in terms of approaching folks has changed quite a bit since I've been in office. But really, I can't agree enough with all that's been said earlier about relationship building and how important it is to just make that ask. I mean, the worst that people can do is say no. And when Chair Wong was talking about relationships and reaching out to family, of course, I think that that's very, very crucially important. But also think about high school, your high school network, your college network, other networks that you have, and also ex-boyfriends. I think I read an article somewhere that Klobuchar reached out to a lot of ex-boyfriends and raised thousands of dollars. I mean, I didn't get to that level, but I did get my ex-boyfriend to put out a lawn sign for me because I found out that he's a constituent. So it's really just a matter of just talking to them, make that ask, and meet people where they're at too. I think at some point you have to just remember you won't agree with anyone 100%. So just meet them there, let them know where you stand. And even if you agree to disagree, you've proven that you've done your research, you're prepared, and you're ready to have the conversation. I think that's the most important part. And so that skill set of listening, of empathizing, of being compassionate and showing people that you care, and that even if you don't agree with them, you're willing to be there to at least listen and try to understand where they're coming from. And I think all of that will serve you well as you're looking to run. But the reality of it is take that leap of faith. I didn't think I was going to run either. It's from what I'm hearing here, most of us didn't, and we did it. And we hope that you will consider it because as has been said before, we're the first, but we don't want to be the only ones. And we want to be able to help build the pipeline. And actually one last thing I also agree about representation at all different levels on board, but I also think it's important for us to invest in a pipeline to get interns who are AAPI. I'm certainly in my office, we've prioritized that to make sure that people get their foot in the door, because what we found is that people who've worked in government, have some exposure to government, tends to be more civically engaged and will more likely run for office. And so how do we get more people into the doors? And how do we continue to provide them resources and support as they go through? I continue to give, write letters of recommendation and also be references for many of my interns so that I can get them into whether it's school or other opportunities where their voices are so much needed.
Thank you so much for that. And that just reminds me, as I plug APEX, that we do have a part of that as a part of our signature programs, internships and fellowships here on the Hill to serve the KPAC members and other Asian American elected leaders here on the Hill as we, become, as we are, the fastest growing demographic in this country. And so we want to be sure that we have Asian American Pacific Islanders who are working in the halls of Congress as congressional interns and congressional fellows. They are paid positions. And so we're very excited when we see our cohorts grow and they continue to stay in public service. So thank you so much for doing that at the state legislature. And to a reminder for our participants who are watching today, please put your questions in the chat box if you're here on Hopin. If you're viewing this on Facebook, please put it in the comment section and we will get to them before this panel ends. Let me go on to another question here to the trustee. You've served on multiple commissions, for San Mateo County and Daly City. What advice do you have for folks who are seeking appointments on local boards and commissions? This is something that our founder, former Secretary Norman Y. Mineta, has talked a great deal about, joining a board or commission as a first step instead of running for office. So what would your advice be?
I think I shared a little bit of my advice is one, to do your research and homework on the committees, on the commissions, on the boards that you hope to secure a spot in. But I think that it's important too to look to someone that might be in leadership that can mentor you. I've been very fortunate to be mentored by some great individuals. I don't know if our current vice president even recalls that she and I, during our Willie Brown days in city and county of San Francisco, was a huge mentor to me, impacted my life greatly. And she took this time out to reach out and mentor me up. And I think it's important that we seek mentorships if we don't recognize the leadership that's at the helm. I think that those opportunities allow us a learning opportunity and have a front row seat. Mentorship is key. And as mentioned earlier, opportunities for internships, because we might not always get the seat on these commissions or these boards. For instance, there's internship opportunities for our legislators, but for me on the school board level, there's internship opportunities in our district office of education, local school districts. So I always encourage folks to get their feet wet in local government. And as was shared earlier, PTAs are a good springboard for you to learn the mechanics and inner workings, because it's very political. PTAs are very political, and it allows you an opportunity and a lens to see the inner workings of community. I will say another way to really get your feet wet in the community is to be very involved, as was shared earlier. You might not always be able to secure the seat that you hope to get, as I alluded to earlier, but the reality is that when you're in service, people will see you, especially when you're genuinely serving. And that allows you an opportunity to be a bright spot in the work that you do. And leadership recognizes that. And a lot of times you're asked to serve in seats that become vacant. So I say be present, be relevant, continue to build your relationships. If also learn and attend legislative days in your district. Learn who your legislators are, make time to meet with them, let them get to know you, and let them know that you are an important voice. And if you're interested, apply. For us in California, we have an API legislative caucus, and we recognize the power and the opportunity that they have in facilitating these seats. And a lot of times that wisdom needs to be shared. There's a huge learning curve that we're not a part of. So I really encourage everyone to take advantage of locally any opportunities of internship, any involvement you can be a part of on the community level, and get involved with your legislators. Let them know who you are so that when the opportunity arises, you're ready.
Thank you so much for sharing that. One of the things that we've learned in our work here in the women's space is that API women, regardless of whether or not they have any prior public service experience, it has been seen by voters that they will elect a 50-year-old Asian American woman, regardless of party, against a white male for governor if she exhibits any of these three qualities: that she has had been a community advocate, she has been a person who creates private-public partnerships, or she creates economic opportunities. So to me, that talks a lot about our community, about being small business owners. We do a lot of that in being able to create these partnerships, private and public, being able to create economic opportunities. So Commissioner Xiong, you are a small business owner yourself. You have done that. You continue to do that as a part of your everyday life. What did you learn from your business that translated over to you being a commissioner?
Sure. So I have a clothing store in Warren, and I'm invested in the community economically, employing local residents, and in business, customer service is number one. And you learn that every product that we make is it involves the customer and what their needs are. And so working in public office now, I've learned that the constituents are our customers, and that everything we do is always in their best interest and with them in mind. And so when I'm sitting at the table making decisions, I'm always thinking about my constituents and what would they want me to do, because I am their voice. They elected me to make these important decisions. And so I always have them in mind. So that's what it has taught me, being a small business owner and then now being on the board of commissioners.
Thank you. Chair Wong, you have seen so much, as you mentioned in your stories to us just recently. What do you see for Asian American political engagement and civic engagement in Houston in terms of the future? We know that we're a growing population in Texas. So what do you predict for Asian Americans in Texas and in Houston?
Well, we have a much larger community now, and our Vietnamese community is very, very large. And the Vietnamese seem to be willing to take more risk than do the Chinese and the other ethnic groups in Houston. So what I see is people willing to serve, but what I think the mistakes that are being made. It's the first time in 22 years that we have not had an Asian Pacific Islander on the Houston City Council. So since my beginning back in 1993, we've always had an Asian American on the Houston City Council. The mistake that I see people making is that they think they can run without advice from those who have run before. And I don't know whether it's pride that they're afraid to ask for help. There are some that will come and ask me for help because all of us who have been elected know the ropes. We know how to run an election. We know what it's going to take. We know how much money it's going to take. And we know the field that's out there. And so if people who want to run, they need to talk to elected officials and to find out how to do it, because I'm willing to share that with anyone that wants to. Many times I have myself had to call some of the people that I know that are running and say, I'll be happy to help you. Can we meet? And some of them will want to meet, and some of them think that they know how to do it on their own. But it's not as easy as it's perceived. And because we had a long history of Asian Americans being elected to the Houston City Council, I think people took it for granted that they could run. Now, I ran in a district that only had 5% Asian American Pacific Islanders. So every one of them, I hope, voted for me, and I knocked on every one of their doors. But you cannot only count on the Asian American Pacific Islanders for voting for you. You have to reach out communities wherever you plan to run. So that's why you have to have that neighborhood to build that. But I anticipate that we will continue to have great things happen. More Asians will run. Right now in Texas, we have 4 Asian Americans who are serving the Texas legislature. I'm waiting for one of my friends up in Dallas to run for a Senate position. So we're making headway. And what I try to do is to establish a relationship with everyone who's running so that we can work together and help each other out. And those of you that still have campaign funds, I always shared a part of my campaign funds with people who were running for the first time and gave them a big boost. I would usually donate at least $5,000 to their campaign to let them know that I believed in them and that it would set an example for other people to also give them money. So I anticipate great things as the Houston Asian Pacific Islander community moves forward, and that we'll find someone next time. I'm going to find them myself if no one pops up.
Thank you for recruiting and identifying with talent. I mean, I think that's so important. All of you do that, and I think it's so important for us as we continue to think about, what seats are open for us and the opportunities that we might have to run for office in the future. So we are at our closing here, and I really do want to thank each of our panelists for participating today. They've broken barriers and surpassed challenges to be in the positions that they're in, and continue to give back by bringing others with them in the process. So thank you to each of you for doing that. We have in the chat box here the contact information for those who are on the panel in case you want to stay in touch with them. So we appreciate them doing that and sharing all of their advice and guidance for how to run for office and being able to break those barriers. So thank you so much. We really do appreciate all of you for joining us today. I really would like to make sure that following this session, for those of you who are joining us for the summit, the breakout sessions will begin at noon. So please click the sessions tab on the left of your screen to select which breakout session you'd like to join. So thank you again to all of our panelists, and I look forward to seeing you in our sessions.